for NNP Productions reported.
Liberator, a great name, well attuned to the huge, gleaming silver bombers which at this very moment, in all parts of the globe, are roaring off into the blue on their missions of liberation. Glorious winged giants of the skies are these B-24 Liberators, bringing a message of hope and freedom to the oppressed peoples of the world. And indeed, their very name was coined by our brothers and allies, the British people, to whom, in their darkest hour, a small vanguard of 6 Liberator bombers brought comfort and hope for the future. From the skies over Normandy during the D-Day invasion, to the Battle of the Bulge, to the push into Nazi Germany, from the Philippines to Burma to Japan itself, the B-24 Liberator brought hope to our allies and struck fear into the hearts of Hitler, Mussolini, and Tojo. Consolidated aircraft built over 19,000 B-24s from its introduction in 1941 through the end of World War II. Stretching over 67 feet with a 110-foot wingspan, the Liberator was a feared sight at weapons factories, submarine bases, and airfields throughout Axis territory. Able to carry 8,000 pounds of bombs and drop them with precision using sophisticated bomb sights, the B-24 was also armed with 10 50 caliber machine guns in the nose, belly, waist, tail, and top turret to help protect itself from enemy fighters. The B-24 and the B-17 Flying Fortress were the workhorses of the 8th Air Force based in England. The B-24, with a range of 2,200 miles, was able to reach targets on bombing missions throughout occupied Europe. But these missions were risky and many planes and crews were lost in the battle to free the world from tyranny. Let's meet one of the brave men who piloted the B-24 during the war, Captain Warren Alden Blower, enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Corps in 1943 at the age of 19. Between 1944 and 1945, Captain Blower flew 30 missions with the 446th Bomb Group of the mighty 8th Air Force. Flying his first mission as co-pilot, Captain Blower was soon promoted and served as first pilot for the remainder of his missions. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for his heroic service to America during World War II. Let's meet Captain Blower. How long did you serve in the U.S. Army Air Corps?
It was about 33 months, I think, a little short of 3 years.
Where were you when the bombing of Pearl Harbor occurred?
When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, I was going to Fenn College in Cleveland. It was in December 7th, and on that particular day, I was out in Jefferson, Ohio, where my brother lived, and he and I were installing a kitchen sink. So he brought me back to Cleveland that evening, and I heard about it on the radio.
How did you feel when you heard about it?
I thought my life was probably going to change.
Did you volunteer for the Army, or were you drafted?
I volunteered. I had just turned 19 years old, and they reduced the draft age from 21, I think it was, to 18. If you were 18 years old, you could be drafted. And you had to be, I think it was 21, or have your parents' consent. I had a little trouble with the parent consent. I finally convinced them that that's what I wanted to do, and they did allow me to enlist.
How did you end up in the U.S. Army Air Corps?
Well, maybe I just preferred it. I really didn't care for being in the trenches or in the foxholes or things like that. And I thought, at least I'll have a clean bed at night and probably better food. I was a little selfish about it. It was looking after me, I guess. At the end of pre-flight, they sent us to a classification center in Nashville. And there they gave us all kinds of tests, psychiatric tests and motor tests, doing different things with your hands, how coordinated you were. And I think everyone wanted to be a pilot. So they separated us out there. Some of us went to pilot school, some navigator, some bombardier. And that was all done for us. We, of course, had choices, but they didn't always work out.
What was your role on the B-24?
I had 2 roles. First, I was a co-pilot. When we graduated from pilot training, they took about half of my graduating class and made them instructors at the field where we had our advanced flying training. And the rest of us went to Westover Field in Massachusetts, up near Springfield. And we thought we were going there for some additional pilot training, But like the Army does sometimes, you really don't know what they're going to do. So if we had not been to a transition school to learn to fly 4-engine bombers, we all became co-pilots. So there I was a co-pilot, and the crew was formed there. All of the 10 members of the crew were put together. We went from there to Savannah, Georgia, and went through our operational training. And well, that was a story by itself, I guess. At the end of our training, they took the pilot off and gave us a new pilot. So we went through the training again. Then after that, we went up to Langley Field in Virginia, and we were training radar navigators for bomb crews. And at that time, we didn't know where we were going, but we knew we were headed for overseas. A very good friend of mine was in the same program, and he went to the South Pacific, and I went to England. And that was in, if you're interested in the date, we left the States on the 1st of September, 1944. This book, the photo on the front is the crew I went overseas with. This is me standing here, and this is the crew. We were training in Savannah, Georgia at this time. This crew, this was the second pilot we got, and he went overseas with us. He was the pilot, I was the co-pilot. And on the first mission, what they do, or did in our group at any rate, was put an experienced pilot on to help the crew get through their first combat mission. So I put another pilot on with our crew. And I was going to go and just sort of stand between the seats and learn what I could. But at the last minute, they called me to go with a different crew because the co-pilot on that crew had a sinus problem and he couldn't fly at high altitude. So I went with a different crew, and this crew that I went overseas with was shot down the first day they went out. They were pretty well shot up, I guess, and were headed back across the North Sea to go back to England, and they decided they couldn't make it. So even after throwing everything they could out of the plane, they turned back and went back across Holland. As they went across the capital city of Holland, they were shot up again by the German troops who were still there. And just south of The Hague, they bailed the crew out. And the guy that went as a co-pilot was killed coming down in his parachute. He was shot. And the pilot here was the last one out, of course. And my feeling is that they were too low when he bailed out and his chute didn't open completely and he was killed. But out of the rest of them, 4 of them were captured and were prisoners, and the other 4 of them were with the Dutch underground. The underground consisted of what previously was the Royal Dutch Army. When the Germans took over Holland, they disbanded the Dutch Army, and they were not organized, but they formed an underground where they did all kinds of subterfuge against the Germans. And the radio operator, where is he? This fellow was blonde and looked a little more mature than some of the rest of them. So a farmer in Holland took him into his house. They lived with the farm family for the duration of the war.
Did your plane have a nickname?
We had the plane we flew overseas was a brand new one, of course, and we had something painted on the nose of it, but I don't remember what it was. When we got to England, immediately they took it away from us. We didn't keep it.
Where were you? So you were stationed in England during the war?
Where?
You were stationed in England?
In England, yes, during that part of the war. This is a map of the eastern part of England. And this shows the position of all the different bomb groups who were stationed in England. The one I was stationed at was right here, the 446 Bomb Group in Bungay, B-U-N-G-A-Y, right there, almost the furthest east of all the groups. So I was there from the 1st of September until the end of the war. I was on my way home when the war ended. I'd finished my missions.
What were some of the missions that you went on?
What kind?
Well, like where did you go for the missions?
Well, when I got there at the bomb group, Patton's troops had just entered Paris. And apparently the German troops left them pretty devastated, the citizens. So our group was involved in taking supplies into Paris at Orly Field, and they modified the bomb bays so that they had shells in them, and they took flour and all kinds of necessities for them to eat. And so that lasted a couple of weeks, but I was not involved in that. And so it was, I think, the 26th of September before I flew the first combat mission against Germany. And from there, all of my missions were, 29 missions were into Germany. And only one was in France, down along the coast of France, down near Bordeaux, I guess. It was interesting, I guess, that the strategic bombing that we were involved in, we were involved in taking their resources away from them, bombing the oil refineries, bombing their railroad centers, bombing their places where they assembled the trains. They called them marshalling yards, we would call them railroad yards, and roundhouses. We had some roundhouses, overpasses, and as soon as they would get an oil refinery back in production, we would bomb it again. So toward the end of the war, a lot of the captured equipment was because they didn't have gasoline to move it back. So I think it was, the strategic part of it seemed to be very effective. I had a good friend that was in the infantry, and I used to always praise him because of the job he did. And he kept insisting that we made it easy for them because so much equipment was abandoned. Sometimes they didn't have much of a battle.
How long was each mission, approximately?
Well, they averaged, I suppose, well, I mean, the shortest one would be maybe 5.5 or 6 hours. The longest one was a little over 10 hours. But I would say average maybe about 7 hours, something like that.
What were some of your targets?
Some of the targets? Well, the interesting one that I remember a lot of, maybe you know, when General Eisenhower had the invasion of the continent in June of 1944, General Patton and his troops came in from the north and went toward the east. And a little bit later, General Carr came in from the Mediterranean and north and east. And over on the coast of France, there was a pocket of Germans. They left there. As long as they didn't cause any trouble, they just kept them bottled up. And this group of German soldiers were being supplied by submarine from the harbor. And being ingenious, they turned there were a lot of coastal guns there that they were aimed to point out to sea. And the Germans were ingenious enough, they turned them on their bases, and they started to shell some of the French towns inland. And of course they didn't go much for that. So they loaded us up with 2,000-pound bombs, 4 of them in each plane. We went down and destroyed the coastal guns so they couldn't bomb the French anymore. Well, I thought that was an interesting. As far as other missions, we did a lot of bombing on the Ruhr Valley. That was the industrial center. A lot of bombing along the Rhine River, Cologne and Kassel. And the longest one, I think, was down on the border of Austria, Hungary, and Germany, right along the Danube River. We went clear down to the town was called Passau. That was the longest one. It was kind of interesting.
And did you participate in D-Day?
No, I was, I didn't go over until September, and D-Day was June 7th, I think, early in June. But I was about 3 months after D-Day when I went over.
Was your bomber ever hit?
Yes, several times. I think one time we had about half a dozen holes from anti-aircraft fire in the right wing. And another time they shot 88 millimeter flak guns at us. And fortunately they didn't have proximity fuses. If they had, things might have been a little different. But they had to set the fuses to go off at different altitudes. And one of them, the complete shell, so big, went through the tail assembly and kept right on going. But, fortunately, it didn't explode. That was the only time, I think, I was ever hit that I know of.
Did your crew talk to each other much when you were in the air?
Not a whole lot. It was pretty much strictly business. I suppose the most talking was done by the bombardier. We had assigned him the job of doing oxygen checks because above about 18,000 feet, or maybe less than that, if you don't have oxygen to breathe, you'll pass out and it will allow you to die. So about every 5 minutes, the bombardier would ask for an oxygen check, and each one of the crew would respond. If someone didn't respond, somebody went to his aid. So we made sure that everyone had oxygen to breathe. Keeping warm at 40 below zero was always a little challenge. So what I did was I would wear a pair of normal socks, and then I put the pair of wool socks that Peg knit for me over those. And then we had heated suits that had electrical heating elements in them, and there was a set of boots, and they snapped onto the leggings, and the leggings snapped onto the vest, and the gloves snapped on. But I would put the heated boots on over the socks that Peg knit me, and then I somehow or other got a pair of size 15 wool socks. I put those wool socks over the heated boots, and then I wore fur-lined boots over it.
Wow.
So, and my feet were still cold sometimes. We had the mask that snapped on, and it had to fit tight around here. And after you had it on for several hours, it felt like somebody had you like this and was pushing you.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
It felt, and your breath contains moisture, so the moisture for your breath would freeze up on the exhaust ports. And once in a while, when you exhale, you would feel air coming out around your eyes, and that means that your ports are frozen up, so you had to take your hands and crunch the ice loose so you could exhale.
All right.
And the moisture from your voice or your breath, when it would drip out of these ports, you would fall down on front, and we had a life preserver, and the parachute harness would form ice on your chest. And with the steam from your hands, sometimes on the throttles, the steam would rise up and freeze on the windshield. We had to scrape the windshield off on the inside.
How many people were on the B-24 when it was up in the air on missions?
Normally there were 10. After about 11 missions, I became a first pilot. And almost at the same time, I became a lead crew pilot. So being a lead crew, we led a squadron of 10 planes. And in order to be more effective, we had 2 extra navigators. So on my crew, from mission 11 through 30, I had 12 men on the crew. The 2 extra navigators were, one was a radar navigator that could tell from the scope pretty much our position. And the other navigator rode in the nose turret instead of the nose gunner. And he was able to see, he was a pilotage navigator. He was able to see further ahead than the bombardier could from down underneath. So he would help the pilot then line up on the target before the bombardier could see it. And by the time the bombardier could see it, then he had fewer corrections to make.
And what were the different jobs on the
Well, we had on my crew, we had the 3 navigators. We had a bombardier, had a pilot and a co-pilot, and the third navigator, the radar navigator, sat up on the flight deck. The radio operator was beside him. The flight engineer was next to him. There were 2 waist gunners and a tail gunner. Normally, one of them would be in the ball turret. It was down on the belly of the plane. But being a lead crew, we had a radar dome there, not a ball turret. So we used that gunner to use the top turret. So there was, if you want them all, there was a tail gunner, 2 waist gunners, a ball turret gunner, a Martin turret, upper turret gunner, and a navigator, bombardier, and the 2 pilots. That would be normal crew, but I had 2 extra navigators.
Were you married during the war?
Yes. I left for the service in January of '43 and went to some basic training camps. Then I went to Montgomery, Alabama for pre-flight training. That was just physical training and ground school, a lot of ground school. And my wife, my girlfriend, and my sister came down to visit me just at the end of that course. And I guess it was on Sunday we decided we were going to get married on Monday. And we did. But then on Monday night, they scheduled a dress parade. And they weren't going to let me off the base to get married. So I had to do a little pleading with the captain to get off. But he said, you have to be back on base at 10 o'clock. So I was. The next day they confined us to the field. The next day we shipped out. And my wife came back to Ohio and I went to Arkansas.
How did she feel about you flying in the war?
I don't really know. I think she was kind of excited about it. Since we were married at the time when I was in cadet training, it was really not supposed to happen. You're not supposed to be married in the cadet corps. But during the war, they kind of looked the other way. They didn't say much if you were married. So anyhow, when I went to primary flight training in Arkansas, after I'd been there a couple of weeks, she came out and stayed there in the town where I was flying. And then each time I changed position, she went there and got a room and she stayed there. So she went through cadet training with me pretty much. That's why she knows so much about this. We didn't prearrange this that I remember, but when I would fly a combat mission on my letters to Peg, I would say, I wore the socks you lent me today. Mm-hmm. And she picked it up, and so she cut the articles out of the newspaper for those bombing raids and kept a scrapbook of all of my combat missions. Mm-hmm. The code word was the socks. But you know, I wore those socks 30 times, and I put them in the cedar chest, and I don't know where they are now. I think they went with the cedar chest to our daughters, but I would never put them on again. I figured if I put those socks on, I'd probably drop dead.
Which country, in your opinion, do you think had the best Air Force?
Best Air Force? Mm-hmm. The U.S., the 8th Air Force. I got a book out that you might be interested in. I think it's this one. It's The Mighty Eighth. That's the 8th Air Force that was stationed in England. And they referred to it as the Mighty Eighth because at that time it was 2/3 of the total Air Force, the U.S. Air Force. The Germans had some good planes and some good pilots, but they were sort of depleted. We just overwhelmed them with, I guess, toward the end of the war we had superior planes, superior pilots, and the Luftwaffe didn't have gasoline to get their planes off the ground. We had pretty much taken care of that.
How did you feel when you were up in the air?
More or less elated. I liked to fly. It was really interesting. And it was a challenge. You had to be alert all the time. During these bombing missions, of course, there's a lot of apprehension because you don't know if you're going to come back or not.
What was the B-24 like compared to the other bombers?
Well, the only thing I can compare it with is a B-17, I suppose. Well, maybe the British bombers. The B-24, compared with our B-17s, carried a heavier bomb load, carried at a faster speed, and could go further than the B-17s. And we couldn't go to such a high altitude. They could go to maybe 30 or 35,000. We couldn't get over 25,000. But the British had some, they looked very boxy and cumbersome, but they had very powerful engines. And they carried much heavier loads than we did. And they could fly faster, too. The British had some really good bombers. If you want to know which ones they were the Lancaster, the Halifax, and the Stirling. The Lancaster was the most prominent one, I think.
If you could have flown in a different bomber, what would it be?
Well, that's interesting. I thought the B-24 was about the ugliest thing I'd ever seen when I first saw it. By the time I was a co-pilot, it was the first time I had seen it. I didn't know even what it looked like. But the B-17 was a much sleeker, nicer looking airplane. I kind of thought it was pretty nice. But after I'd flown the B-24 for a while, I was glad I was in it. A preference might be a B-29, the Super Fortress, which I flew in the South Pacific. But there were very few of those. And in fact, when I came home from overseas, I was scheduled to go to Boise, Idaho, and go into transition to fly a B-29. But the war, of course, ended in Japan before that happened.